My name is Steve Preziosi. I'm an attorney here in New York City. My practice focuses in the area of appeals, specifically appeals in New York state courts and federal courts throughout the country. One of the things I focus on here in New York are post-judgment motions. Post-judgment motions are brought under Article 440 of New York State's criminal procedure law. There are two principal sections under 440 under which the motions are brought, 440.10 and 440.20. This video is going to be dealing exclusively with 440.10. I'm going to go over some of the general aspects of the 440 motion and grounds under which 440 motions are brought, and then reasons that trial courts must deny 440 motions and reason trial courts may deny within their discretion. I'm going to start with a couple of general aspects of 440 motions. 440 motions are brought to the trial court. It's not an appeal. It's not brought to the appellate court. It's brought back to the trial court where the conviction was had. So whether the conviction was after a plea and sentence or after a trial, 440 motions are always brought back, almost always, to the judge that either presided over the trial or was presiding at the plea and sentence. So that's where your 440 motion is brought, to the trial court. And in both cases, it's brought post-judgment. It's a post-judgment motion. In other words, it's brought after the sentence. Okay? Keep in mind, not an appeal, not brought to the appellate court, brought to the trial court. All right? The first thing I'm going to do is go over the reasons that a trial court must deny, and must deny a 440 motion. And of course, we're talking exclusively about 440.10 motions, not 440.20. 440.10 motions are motions to vacate the conviction. There are reasons I'll go over in another video that under 440.10 where you might just want to vacate the sentence. I'm not going to address that in this video. This is just 440.10, reasons to vacate the conviction. I'm going to go over the grounds, but first, reasons that the trial court must deny a 440.10 motion. And this is important. These are important to know because the reasons that a trial court must deny will channel you into specific types of grounds almost 99.9% of the time. So I'm going to go over these real quick, and then we're going to get to the grounds that under which you would bring a 440.10 motion. Trial court must deny a 440 motion where the issue has already been determined on appeal. So if a higher court has already determined the issue, you can't bring it back to the trial court, back to a lower court. If your appeal is pending, if your appeal is presently pending, your appellate brief is before the appellate division, and you have raised that issue, you cannot bring it in a 440 motion. Or if you've already completed your appeal and you failed to bring that particular issue up on appeal before the appellate division, then as long as there are sufficient facts, that's an important point. As long as there are sufficient facts on the record where you could have brought that issue on appeal, then you can't bring it in the 440 motion. And again, the last one I don't have listed here on the slide, but if under 440.10, if the issue deals exclusively with a sentence, this has to do with sentencing, then you would not bring it under 440.10, you would bring it under 440.20, which we'll deal with in a different video. Reasons that a trial court may deny a 440.10 motion. Where you could have raised facts that would have supported the legal issue on appeal, where the legal issue had been raised in a previous motion, whether it was a 330 motion or a 440.10 motion, or even in a motion in limine, whatever type of motion you had raised. If it's been raised previously, you can't bring it in a 440.10 motion. And then if these are the next two kind of deal with the trial court having to deal with successive motions where people who are in jail for a lengthy period of time, they bring multiple 440 motions to prevent them from raising the same issue over and over again, we have these next two subsections under 440.10 sub 3, where the issue had been raised by in a previous motion, or where the issue had been could have been raised but was not. In all of those cases, the trial court, the legislature decided to give the trial court discretion, so that if there is some merit to the issue, the trial court always has a discretion in the interest of justice, or where good cause is shown, they can grant the 440 motion if it's meritorious. The grounds for 440 motion. I'm going to go pretty quickly through. The grounds are under 440.10 sub 1. I'm going to go pretty quickly through A through F. Because the overwhelming majority of 440 motions are brought under 440.10(1)G, which is new evidence, and 440.10(1)H, which are constitutional violations. So let's just go through A through F. They're pretty simple and self-explanatory. 1A is the trial court didn't have jurisdiction over the subject matter or over the defendant. The next is the judgment was procured by some duress or misrepresentation or fraud on the part of the court or the prosecution. If some material evidence was false and the prosecution knew about it, that it was false, that's grounds for a 440 motion. If there's some material evidence that was presented at trial that was obtained in violation of your constitutional rights, usually we're talking about U.S. constitutional rights, under the 4th, 5th, or 6th Amendment, search and seizure, Miranda violations, 6th Amendment, ineffective assistance of counsel, or there's a whole host of other constitutional issues under the 6th Amendment, or Article 1, Section 6 of the New York State Constitution, where the defendant is incapable of understanding or participating due to some mental disease or defect. And if there is if there's some improper conduct that occurred off the record, that had it occurred on the record and would have been an appealable issue, that is grounds for a 440 motion. Now, I first listed the reasons that a trial court must deny and may deny, because those reasons, I call them the woulda, shoulda, coulda. If you would have, should have, could have raised them on appeal, or did raise them on appeal, that eliminates a whole host of issues that you can bring under Article 440.10. And what it does is it kind of channels you, almost the overwhelming majority of the time, it channels you into these two grounds, whether it's new evidence that has been discovered after trial that could not have been discovered with due diligence, or, and this is the final one, that the overwhelming 440.10(1)H, the overwhelming majority of 440 motions are brought under this, where the judgment was obtained in violation of the U.S. Constitution or the New York State Constitution. And what that means most of the time is ineffective assistance of counsel, where trial counsel had neglected to do something, whether it was bring forward evidence, and there's a whole host of reasons for that trial counsel may have been ineffective. There is extensive case law on this that I'll deal with in another video. Suffice to say, the principal case law that you're going to be dealing with here is in New York State, People versus Baldi, People versus Benevento. Whether there was meaningful representation. And under the federal standard, the Strickland versus Washington, you have the two-step analysis for ineffective assistance of counsel under the federal standard. So this is just an overview of Article 440 and the 440 motions under 440.10 in order to vacate the conviction. If you have questions, you can always give me a call. Very easy to find, 1-800-APPEALS. As I said, my practice is here in New York City on Wall Street. I practice in the area of appeals, post-judgment motions in both state court and federal courts throughout the country. Thanks for listening.